welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. And let's just give a little shout out to ourselves for showing up on a Wednesday night when it's dark already. And good for us. Good for us. So without further ado, I'm just kind of wondering if anyone has we'll have more of a discussion after the video and after the sit. But I'm wanting to know if anybody has encountered any good news or bad news about your practice, about the centering prayer practice. And I'd just like to hear how you're doing. Is it doable for you? Is it too hard in one way, too easy? You don't understand?
Hi. Well, I find that it's getting easier, which now that I've said that, I'm going to, of course, encounter
Yeah.
Oh, God. And I found a copy of The Cloud of Unknowing that I forgot I had in my bookshelves. And I thought, well, this is what great synchronicity. And that is adding just a beautiful element to what I'm doing. And it's really helping me to unplug from the thinking. Not to say that I'm not thinking all the time, but it just gives me a beautiful reference point. So I'm kind of surprised. This morning I woke up and I thought, oh, great, I get to do centering prayer, which has not typically been my experience with my, other contemplative practices I've done.
Kind of interesting. I find, this is such I'm going to say simple in quotations. It's a simple, not particularly easy, but it's a simple practice. And it's so changeable for me over the years. Right now, I'm in this mood where, I'm up to 24 minutes. And because I decided, that it seems too short now. Don't think you have to keep adding minutes, because you don't. But if you're called to add minutes, go ahead and add minutes. But I find that God is everywhere. And even in your practice, in every little teeny bit of your practice, there is God. Because your intention is to be with God. And so God's in your thoughts, and those thoughts that come up, they're coming up for a reason. I think we work with our subconscious mind and our God, and God's everywhere. So don't be alarmed or even thrilled because it could change tomorrow, like you said. So I'm going to share a little video. We'll hear what Carl Arico has to say to us today.
Well, you've now had your first experience of centering prayer. And when people have had their first experience of centering prayer, their reaction seems to fall into 4 different little categories. Most of you probably could not get over how many thoughts you had. You started out very nicely, peace, peace. Halfway through it, you were going peace, peace. And then if you didn't set an alarm or a timer and decided you were going to peek at your watch, you probably said, oh my God, this must be over 20 minutes. I better take a look. And you looked at your watch and it was only 3 minutes had passed. And you say to yourself, I still have 17 more minutes to go. Well, that's very normal. And those of you who continually went back to your word peace, or the word that you chose, which is a symbol of your consenting to God's presence and God's action in your life, you were praying the prayer as it's supposed to be prayed. But what you did notice was you had so many thoughts that it was hard to let them go, and so you had to say the prayer many times. That's very normal. Don't right away think that this isn't for you. What you experience is just how powerful your thoughts can be in your life. and how hard it is just to let them come and let them go. In our next talk, we'll get into thoughts a little more in detail. So that's the larger group of you. So if you've experienced this, then in a certain sense, you hit the norm. Some of you sat there and said, this isn't prayer. How can this be prayer? I'm sitting here not saying anything but this word. What type of communication is that if I can't be always talking? And some of you may have slipped in and decided to pray some of your regular prayers during that time so that you would say to yourself, I don't want to waste this time. It's too precious. Well, that's okay too, as a first experience. Because to really be honest with you, it's very hard to realize how powerful communication really is when you talk about it in terms of presence. And I'll be honest with you, in my own life, when I was ill for a period of time, not long, I've been very healthy most of my life, I really appreciated the presence of people around me rather than their words. Do you know what I'm saying? And so just because you're not talking, don't think you're not communicating. And when you return ever so gently to your sacred word, in this case, peace, if you chose that, what you're doing is giving God the greatest gift you can give God, you. You. And when you feel comfortable with someone, you don't always have to be talking. But when you're not comfortable with someone, you're always talking. So the second group that went on to other prayers because they weren't too sure that they wanted to make sure they didn't waste any time or anything, that's perfectly fine because it takes a while to get used to just offering your presence to the divine presence and allowing the divine presence to do whatever action of healing needs to take place. Some of you may have thought you fell asleep. I think I fell asleep, Father, you know. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep, you know. I'm almost certain I fell asleep, and I guess I wasted my time. No, you didn't waste your time. What makes you think you awake are more pleasing to God? Seriously, if your intention was to be in the presence of God, consenting to God's presence in action, and you were at a proper position as Gail explained it, and you fell asleep, so what? You trusted in the presence of God and allowed God to do whatever God needed to do during that time. We have to let go of the idea that prayer means performance. Prayer means presence. And the fourth group could not get over how fast the time went. And they felt, my goodness, I can't believe that I, of all people who could not keep quiet for 2-3 minutes, actually kept quiet this long. Whatever you experienced, the beauty of the relationship was this, that in this period of time, you offered to your God the most wonderful gift you can offer to God, consenting. In the spirit of the Blessed Virgin Mary, be it done unto me according to your word. Spirit of Jesus praying to his dad in the garden, thy will be done, thy will be done. That's what you did. That's what you did. And so I encourage you to continue to pursue the practice of the prayer as we continue with this program. It's very, very, very special. Gail mentioned the fact you don't change the word in the beginning. When you pray your prayer, the time that you're praying, you stay with that one word. Now, what happens a lot of times is because it's not kicking in right away, the way you think it should be, you figure maybe I don't have the right word. And sometimes in the beginning, the persons will begin to switch the words to make sure they get the right word. Remember, it's not the word that's important. What is important is the intention for which that word stands for. But sometimes we're a little sneaky. You figure, oh, today I need patience. Maybe today I should switch my word to patience. Now, isn't that subtle manipulation on your part? Don't you think God already knows what you need before you ask him? You know, so in a special way, you know, just trust that your intention and your heart will be read by the Lord, and the Lord knows why you're doing it. Now, here's some practical considerations. You certainly need a timer. You don't need a timer. You could keep looking at your watch, but it's so much easier to set up a little timer, a gentle alarm that won't be too jarring for the 20 minutes, and allow that to process the prayer for you. Now, be careful. In the beginning, the prayer may seem a little long, and so you'll say to yourself, I think the battery died. I think the battery died. Well, just ever so gently return to your sacred word. Let that thought come. Let that thought go. You might want to have a special place in your home that you'll set aside to do this prayer, where there's the least amount of disturbance. But please, this is a prayer of silence, not of quiet. You'll never find the most quiet place that you need. And so that's important, but you do your best to find a place that will best be suitable for you. How do we begin our prayer time? The vast majority of people who pray centering prayer will be reading from a passage of Scripture to celebrate not the meditation and pondering of that Scripture, but to remind themselves of who they're sitting with. They're sitting with Jesus, who introduces us to the Father and the Spirit, and you want to keep that relationship alive by the way you begin your prayer. Many find it very helpful to pray with others. I remember one of our commentators on television asking one of our people on an interview, saying, why should you sit with a group, when all you're doing is sitting there in silence? And her answer was, why not? And those of you who will have experienced the group praying together, and we encourage that too, is that you'll be amazed how there's a wonderful bond that begins to develop in the silence that begins to strengthen you on a much deeper level. I also like to mention the fact, as we're looking at all of this, that at the time of your prayer, you might begin to notice some twitching. All of a sudden, you're sitting there quietly and you feel a little twitch in your leg or your shoulder. We believe that's the untying of emotional blockage in you. Now, you don't have to, tough it out. If you need to you're allowed to, maybe scratch if you need to or make a little adjustment. But don't think in a certain sense nothing's happening or that's a disturbance. Because you're consenting to God's presence and God's action in your life, some emotional energy is being let loose. You might also see that there's a certain heaviness or lightness that you have. It's just a sign of deep rest. Don't get involved in trying to get signs during the prayer. It is what it is, and that's the beauty of the prayer. And this response to that is, when you become aware, ever so gently return to your sacred word. You let it come and you let it go, as gentle as the little feather falling on absorbent cotton in the process that you're involved in. Now, there's other symbols that can be used besides words, but it's much more different in a certain sense than most. There is such a thing as the sacred gaze that you might use. These people, the people who use this are those who in a very special way seem to be more artistic in the way they approach life. And so what happens actually is they don't actually look at something with great detail. They're aware of the presence of colors and so on. And there's also the sacred breathing. But it's not a breathing like most of us think about, that you pay attention to the breath going in and going out, going in and going out. It's just a slight awareness that whenever you find yourself beginning engaged with some other thoughts and so on, ever so gently you notice your breathing. The vast majority, though, of people will use the sacred word. It's a symbol of your consenting not only to God's presence, but also to God's healing action in your life, allowing your God to have God's way with each one of you. Now, there's something very special about those 4 guidelines. They are rich in our Christian tradition. The first guideline of choosing a sacred word captures the wonderful tradition that comes out of the Desert Fathers and Mothers that pointed out the fact that many times one word or one phrase can bring God's presence into your life on a much deeper level. And that evolved into what many of you are aware of as the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner, that became then Lord Jesus, and then just Jesus, mercy. So that first of choosing a sacred symbol and a sacred word is very rich in our tradition. The second, you might say, what's the big deal of sitting comfortably, back straight, feet on the ground, hands in your lap? You're sending a message to God. All of me. Why not take all of me? Can't you see I'm no good without you? So you're saying in a very special way, do whatever you need to do from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, because we know, and this is a little phrase that we use, the issues are in the tissues. That, as St. Thomas said, and Thomas mentioned it, about our house is a warehouse of, our body is a warehouse of experience. And so when we bring our whole being, we just aren't there just to change our thinking. We want to become the new creation that St. Paul calls us to be. And no longer put aside your old self and take on your new self. So that second guideline is rich. The third guideline, when engaged with thoughts ever so gently return to your sacred word, is the wonderful gift of what we call let go, let God. That's a phrase that many times you hear people say. And as the Desert Fathers said about thoughts, warfare against our thoughts is the hardest thing after you decide to live a good moral life. It's the thoughts that cause most of our problems in our lives, of which 95% of those thoughts never become reality. So when you're sitting there in the wonderful container, safe and sacred, sacred and safe space of the prayer, and in that you can ever so gently return to the sacred word and let the thoughts go. And remember, whatever's coming up is going out. Remember, whatever's coming up is going out in the prayer. If you can gently let go of that, then you create a ripple effect that comes into your daily life, which we'll talk about later in the program, that begins to help you let go of other things in your life that you're having a difficulty of letting go. Wonderful principle in that simple little guideline. And the last guideline that says when you're finished, remain in that silence for a while, says give yourself some space, for goodness sakes, in your life. You don't always have to be going at things 100%. You can give yourself little mini vacations. I like to say to people, part of that fourth principle is this: God's calling us to have a conversion from American cheese to Swiss cheese. God's calling us to get some holes in us so the Spirit, the holy breath, the Ruah, can get into that life that is so tightly packed with activity and give you a breath of fresh air. And so the method of centering prayer, the 4 guidelines, the taking of the time and making the time to pray the prayer, begins to open up in you a space for the Lord and the Spirit to work in your life on a much deeper way, so that maybe eventually, with the grace of God and our consenting, we can say, I live now, not I, but Christ lives in me. And it starts with a very simple prayer that's not important because of its praying formula, but it offers the best gift that anyone can give. I consent to your divine presence and action within me. In another way, you could say, Lord, I take you, for better or for worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and health, into eternity. And truly believe that having said that, and realizing it's already been said to you, but you're just hearing it for the first time, I take you by name, for better or for worse, rich or poor, sickness and health, into eternity. And it all begins by saying, yes.
And there we have it. How did you like that?
I was just thinking of, I'm not thinking, it's just the presence of Father Arico and his simplicity, and the simplicity of what this prayer is so calming and beautiful. I'd like to just watch it over and over again.
He said so many things, even the last things of what we could pray, verbally, finally, with God, is just that we can also just say, I consent to have you in my life. And even that is such a powerful thing, that it doesn't have to be quiet. It could be in the midst of traffic, but it's really about silence. And silence is different than quiet. And I will have to really dwell on that and think about that. But yeah, just the whole topic was about saying yes. And I think previously I'd been so just focused on the word and just sort of the procedure of it all. It's like in any relationship, just opening up and saying yes. That we get, I think, coming from other meditation, we get focused on this word practice, like we're doing something. But it's really the opposite of practice. It's more like we're allowing, we're consenting to have God work on us. It seems different to me than just practicing something.
I think he covered all the reasons that I make for not feeling successful at being able to center. And so that in itself gave me, it supported me. And, I kept telling myself I'm doing it wrong and I should be more quiet. I should be more still. But all the reasons that he gave, like it's a prayer. The intention is there, even though we can't get to, maybe I can't sit still for 20 minutes yet, but the intention is there that I want to connect. And so I was really glad to hear his explanations.
Many times they'll say, let God do the heavy lifting. And I don't know why, but I tend to like to make things more difficult than they even are. So first I'm going to do my Qigong, and then I'm going to do this prayer, and then I have to sit in this certain place. And if that's not available, I'll sit in the other place. And I start, okay, now I'm consenting. Okay, consent. I make everything so big and so hard. And really, it's just opening to God. I'm going to sit here and open to you. I'm going to be open to your presence and your action, not my action, not make extra action. I don't have to. So, yeah. I think he covered just about everything, didn't he? How can we remember that? I know we should watch the video before every sit. No, maybe not. Another rule, huh? We like our rules. I wanted to mention something. There's an app, and I don't know if you can see this. It's the Centering Prayer by Contemplative Outreach. And so it's a nice app. It's got several different bells. Pick your favorite bell, the one you think is most holy. It has some opening prayers and closing prayers. And, it's a nice little resource, and I highly recommend it. So it's just search for Centering Prayer by Contemplative Outreach. So I'm going to set this, and in the beginning and the end, I'll open with a prayer and then close with a prayer. Make yourself comfortable. Let the body settle. And coming back to right here, right now. Enter your special room of prayer, your place where you can be receptive to God's presence and be receptive and consent to God's action in your life. Awaken us to the oneness of all things, to the beauty and truth of unity. May we become aware of the interdependence of all living things and come to know you in everything and all things in you. For as we attune to your presence within us, we know not separation, and joy becomes our dwelling place. May we become bearers of joy, we who are invited to share in the cosmic dance. May we walk in faith all the days of our life, confident in your divine presence, even in times of trouble, and with assurance for what is and all that is to be. May we have faith in the unfolding of our lives and radical trust in the universe. And there we have it. You probably noticed that there can be a great difference between one sit and another, even in the same day. Sometimes the brain is very, very busy. Sometimes there's a very comfortable nothingness. Sometimes it's mixed. But I can assure you, you are on a spiritual path already. This is your spiritual journey. For some reason, you were called to this. So keeping in mind what you heard from Father Carl Arico, how are you liking the idea of this practice at this point? You've had a couple of weeks. I'm particularly interested in stumbling blocks. This is the place to talk about them.
Amazing how busy my little mind can be. So much to let go of, but I love the simplicity of this. And it really has been helping me have better days. The morning sit is wonderful. I have to admit, I don't always get the evening sit, but it's a journey.
That evening sit for a lot of people is problematic. I think because our lives have gotten busy and, oh, now we've got to do this and that. And I think a lot of people are kind of loose about it. In terms of habits, a lot of times they tell you to anchor a habit, anchor a practice onto a habit, onto something you already do. So for me, the morning sit is easier because I almost always wake up from sleep. And now I've got a little routine, and I do the bathroom stuff, I do the Qigong, and then I come back in here. And it's very simple. There's no grocery store. There's no taking calls. There's no Zoom meetings, And so the morning is easier. There's no failing. You've been called to God. We've all been called. And you're showing up. When you show up, that's all you have to do is show up. This is simple, but sometimes not easy. And it's a receptive prayer as opposed to asking for something or expecting something. So in the very beginning, I was a little bit alarmed at what I called the nothingness. So I had a spiritual director at the time who said, she was a little harsh, I guess. And she said, it's none of your business what God is going to do with you. And that was quite a kind of a slap for me. And she said, and I've since read about this, we don't have the faculties to experience God. And so I'm just stuck using my own ego and all the different components of my own personality. I try to imagine what God is like, or are you hearing, am I doing this right? But knowing that I don't have the faculties, it's kind of like saying, oh, it's something like sight, but it's a sense that you don't have. And that was very alarming for me in the beginning. And I thought, well, what good is it? And then a few years later, I'm presenting and I asked for questions in the session just like this. And a woman said, well, what good is it? And I went, yeah, right. What good is it? Well, centering prayer has a very wonderful PS. And I think Gregory had mentioned going through this. We're going through a transformation. And the actual benefits or the gifts of the prayer are felt in between the prayer. And so that's where you see your personality start to change. I'm pretty amazed at my reactions to the sheltering in place. And I feel so nice and cozy, and I'm fine. I'm fine right here, not fighting it very much, a little bit every once in a while. But you're going to find some changes to your personality as you practice, actually, just about any practice, any prayer practice. So, yeah, so I can see some of you have been through that. Can someone share what the second sit is like for you? Actually showing up for it. How do you show up for it? What's your reminder? Or what actually, I'm kind of interested in what is exactly keeping you from a second sit?
I just have to say, for me, it's some strong inner resistance. And sometimes I'd say for me personally too, it's I have a high expectation of myself, and also the strong resistance, the tension of that, to have, and I know the necessity of a second sit each day, but I just say it still doesn't happen every day.
It works better if you do two. So it's kind of like good, better, best. I had that also. When I first started, I was only doing the morning. I was doing morning centering. And then in the evening, I would do mindfulness. And I thought it was enough until I talked to someone who said, why don't you try doing it like they say.
Right.
And I did, and it became a little easier for me. That was the first benefit. And then it started feeling fulfilling. So when it's fulfilling, it's kind of easy to show up. When you're fighting, it's harder. And it's a matter of, for me, it was prioritizing and just saying, nothing is more important to me than my relationship with God. And to make that a priority, that's easy to say, but a little bit hard to do. So that's my one word of wisdom that I could give you on that one.
For sure.
It was just, and also even when I was studying mindfulness and I was asking people, so I couldn't even do that once a day in the beginning. And I was asking people, I was taking a poll, everyone I ever knew that was practicing any meditation. And how do you exactly get, what's your trick? How do you get to show up there? How do you, I don't seem to do it. I kind of like your inner resistance reminded me of that. And the magic sentence was, this one person who I knew had meditated for years, she said, I just show up. And so I thought, well, that can't be right. I would expect perfection. I would expect more than showing up. Show up, have your mind right, do exactly what they say, follow all the rules. Then I would feel good about it. But she says, no, I just show up. I just show up, close my eyes. And the next thing is I close my eyes. And I just thought that was so simple-minded, which was lovely. It was so simple-minded. So that's what worked for me, to just show up. Show up for you and set my timer. 20 minutes, sit there, close your eyes. What do they say? Oh, there's really only one thing you have to do, which is consent, you know? And what if you did it for 20 minutes and you didn't feel good about it? Sometimes, and Benneth mentioned this last week, she said, sometimes it's at minute 19 when you finally feel like it clicked, that you finally did it. Minute 19. So, you know, there's your miracle right there. Stay for the miracle.
Right.
And yeah, but just to show up, that was a great freedom for me. I sometimes get a perfectionist attitude, and I have to tell myself to get a C in it. And that, I don't know why that works for me, but it just appeals to that perfectionism. And this is just something to just show up twice a day.
Yeah.
I waste 20 minutes quite easily in many shopping or Pinterest, or, you know, I waste 20-minute blocks of time all the time.
Well, I have been doing the second sit. It helped last week when you mentioned tying it to dinner, because I was doing it before bed, and I did find that it sort of it got me energized, and
I know.
sleeping was difficult, which I was like, so that was very helpful. So now I'm just doing it before dinner, and it's just a little harder because, you know, I get into the rhythm of the day and it's hard to carve it out. But it's helping me to let go of my perfectionism. I'm finding it really beneficial.
Well, I think I shared last week that the first year or so of centering, I didn't do the afternoon. I tried a few times and I just didn't like it. And I was too jumpy and bouncy and just couldn't settle. And so I didn't. And I, about a year later, I thought about it again and I started, and it really made a world of difference in my, not just my centering, but kind of in my life, to be honest. I really saw a lot of inner change after I started 2 times a day. And I continue to do that. And I'm starting to love it now.
I just have to admit that I haven't tried the second set at all. And Kate was saying something. She's having some trouble. I think it was Janice that just said, you know, in the afternoon, I get too jumpy. I'm just like wound up just from the day, which is probably the most opportune time to sit and kind of pull it all in. But I haven't tried it yet, but I intend to.
You know, and someone was asking, I'm not sure, what if you don't do the 20 minutes? That's fine. You know, if you have to approach it slowly, sometimes I do that with other things, and, you know, start in a smaller way. It is different when you start with the 20 minutes twice a day.
It was running through my mind that we have that advertising slogan, just do it. and you know, I know that I apply that to the tasks of the day, and I need to shift it. Just do it. I mean, that's what you're saying. Just do it.
Yep. When I was going to the gym, I did the same thing. I would just say, drive to the gym. And then I would get to the gym and I would say, just park the car. Just go through the door. Just get on the bike. You don't have to do anything else. Just get on the bike. Well, once I got on the bike, after a few minutes, then I feel like I could be in the Olympics. So, you know, maybe it's something like that.
What it's worth, and you can tell me if I'm way off base, but when I started and it was really uncomfortable for me at first, you know, thoughts, and my brain felt like it was a pea, you know, there was no room in there. And I thought about just doing 10 minutes instead of 20. And then I thought, no. And I remembered back to years ago when I started running, about how what you really want to do, if you want to run for a half hour, then you have to walk for a half hour until you build up to that half hour. And so I kept saying to myself, I'm going to stick it out for 20 minutes, no matter what happens. And it would be pretty interesting sometimes. I would fight with myself. My word is love, and I would start saying, love, 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 you know, and just, and eventually my mind started to open up. There seemed like there was more room in there, and it just kind of worked after a while.
Me too. And, you know, cheer up. Sometimes you might fall asleep. You might get a nap out of it. It's happened to me. So give it a shot. Just do it. Show up. Show up a couple of times. What's God going to do with you in 20 minutes in the afternoon? Let's see. Let's see.